Zara's claws scraped against the metal floor as she pressed herself against the cold wall of the cargo hold. The ship's lights flickered ominously, casting dancing shadows that made her silver fur stand on end. Through the reinforced viewport, she could see the twisted landscape of Kepler 438b stretching endlessly beneath storm-darkened clouds. This was supposed to be a routine scientific expedition to study the planet's unique ecosystem, but everything had gone wrong the moment they entered the atmosphere. The Nexary research vessel Astral Wind had been forced to make an emergency landing after encountering an unexpected electromagnetic storm. What should have been a controlled descent became a desperate crash landing that left half the ship's systems offline and the hull breached in 3 places. Of the 12 crew members aboard, only 7 had survived the initial impact. Now, 18 hours later, Zara wasn't sure any of them would see another sunrise. She clutched her data pad tighter, reviewing the sensor readings that had been streaming in since their arrival. The planet's surface teemed with predatory life forms unlike anything in the galactic databases. Massive creatures with razor-sharp appendages, pack hunters with acidic saliva, and, worst of all, the swarm entities that seemed to exist as a collective consciousness bent on consuming anything that moved. The ship's automated defenses had managed to keep them at bay so far, but power levels were dropping rapidly. Captain Thax, a grizzled Voltani with deep blue scales and cybernetic implants along his skull, limped over to where Zara crouched. His left arm hung useless at his side, broken during the crash, and green blood seeped through the makeshift bandage wrapped around his forehead. "Any word from the distress beacon?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that echoed off the damaged bulkheads. Zara's ears flattened against her head as she shook it slowly. "Nothing, Captain. The electromagnetic interference from the storm is blocking all long-range communications. Even if someone received our initial mayday, they wouldn't be able to locate us in this chaos." Through the viewport, she watched as a pack of 6-legged creatures with crystalline spines along their backs prowled around the ship's perimeter. Their eyes glowed with an eerie bioluminescence as they tested the hull's integrity with tentative claws. Each scratch against the metal sent shivers through the damaged vessel. Dr. Kem, the expedition's lead xenobiologist, looked up from his portable scanner. His insectoid features were pale with exhaustion, and his compound eyes reflected the emergency lighting as he delivered his grim assessment. "The atmospheric composition is more corrosive than our initial readings indicated. The hull breaches are expanding slowly but steadily. At current degradation rates, we have perhaps 6 hours before the life support systems fail completely." The weight of their situation settled heavily on Zara's shoulders. As the mission's communications specialist and junior science officer, she felt responsible for their inability to call for help. Her species, the Filari, were known throughout the galaxy for their exceptional technical skills and problem-solving abilities, but the sophisticated jamming effect of Kepler 438b's atmosphere was beyond anything she'd encountered in her 3 years of service. Engineering Officer Vex emerged from the lower decks, his reptilian features grim. The Saurian's usually pristine uniform was torn and stained with hydraulic fluid from his attempts to repair the damaged systems. "Main power is down to 30%, he reported, his forked tongue flicking nervously. "I've rerouted what I can to life support and the perimeter defenses, but those creatures out there are getting bolder. They've figured out our weak spots." As if summoned by his words, a thunderous impact shook the entire ship. Sparks flew from an overloaded control panel as something massive struck the starboard hull. Through the viewport, Zara caught a glimpse of a creature unlike any they'd catalogued so far. It stood nearly 3 meters tall on powerful hind legs, its body covered in chitinous armor that seemed to shift and adapt to blend with the surrounding terrain. Multiple rows of serrated teeth filled a maw large enough to bite through steel, and its forearms ended in claws that could punch through reinforced plating. "Breach in Section 7, shouted Medical Officer Nira from her position at the sensor array. The Aquarian's blue-tinted skin had taken on an unhealthy pale hue, and the gill slits along her neck fluttered rapidly with stress. "The emergency bulkheads are holding, but barely." Captain Fex activated the ship's external speakers with his good arm. "This is Captain Fex of the research vessel Astral Wind to any ships in the Kepler 438 system. We are under attack by hostile indigenous life forms and require immediate assistance. Our position is..." He paused, checking the navigation display. "Grid reference 77 Alpha, Northern Continent. If anyone receives this transmission, please respond. Only static answered his call. The predators outside seemed to sense weakness. More impacts rattled the ship as additional creatures joined the assault. Zara could hear the screech of claws against metal, the wet thud of something organic striking the hull, and, underneath it all, a low humming sound that made her fur stand on end. The collective entities were communicating, coordinating their attack. "Captain," Dr. Kem said quietly, his voice barely audible over the chaos outside. "I've been analyzing the behavior patterns of these creatures. They're not just attacking randomly. There's intelligence behind this assault strategy. They're testing our defenses systematically, looking for the most efficient way to breach our hull and reach us." Zara felt her blood run cold. If the creatures were intelligent enough to plan their attacks, it meant they were also intelligent enough to learn from their failures. Each failed assault would make them more dangerous, more prepared for the next attempt. The lights flickered again, plunging them into temporary darkness before the emergency systems kicked in. In that brief moment of absolute black, Zara heard something that made her heart race. The humming had stopped. The scratching and impacts had ceased. Even the ever-present sound of the wind outside had faded to nothing. "Why did they stop?" whispered Pilot Kors, a young Voltani whose blue scales had turned almost white with fear. He'd been the one flying when they crashed, and guilt had been eating at him ever since. Captain Thex checked his sidearm, a standard-issue plasma pistol that seemed woefully inadequate against the creatures they'd witnessed. "They're planning something bigger. Everyone, check your weapons and prepare for..." His words were cut off by a sound that would haunt Zara's dreams for the rest of her life. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, but quickly grew into a bone-shaking roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The ship's hull groaned under some immense pressure, and several wall panels buckled inward as if something enormous was pressing against the entire vessel. "Massive life form approaching from the east." Nira shouted over the noise, her instruments going wild with readings. "It's, by the void, it's huge. The size readings don't make sense." Through the viewport, Zara could see the other predators scattering, fleeing from whatever was approaching. The ground itself seemed to shake with each footstep of the unseen titan. Then, she saw it, a shadow moving between the twisted rock formations, larger than anything that should be able to exist on a world with Kepler 438b's gravity. The creature that emerged from the storm was beyond classification. It stood at least 20 meters tall, its body a nightmare fusion of organic and mineral components. Crystalline growths jutted from its hide like armor plating, while multiple appendages writhed from its torso with apparent sentience. Its head, if it could be called that, contained hundreds of eyes that glowed with malevolent intelligence. "All power to shields," Captain Thex ordered, but, even as he spoke, they all knew it wouldn't be enough. The Titan moved with surprising grace for its size, approaching the crashed ship with deliberate intent. When it was close enough, it reared back on its hind legs and brought its massive forelimbs down on the vessel's hull. The impact sent shockwaves through the entire structure, and Zara felt her teeth rattle in her skull. "Hull breach in sections 4 through 6. Vex reported, his voice tight with panic. "Emergency bulkheads are failing. We're losing atmosphere." The ship's internal gravity fluctuated as power systems struggled to compensate for the damage. Loose equipment flew through the air, and Zara had to grab onto a support beam to keep from being thrown across the cargo hold. The Titan raised its arms again, preparing for another devastating blow. That's when the impossible happened. A streak of light cut through the storm clouds above them, moving faster than any known spacecraft. It wasn't the clean, energy-efficient trajectory of modern propulsion systems. This was raw, chemical rocket thrust, primitive but effective. The object, whatever it was, struck the Titan's head with the force of a meteor. The massive creature staggered backward, its roar of pain and rage audible even through the ship's damaged hull. Dark fluid sprayed from the impact site as the Titan shook its head, clearly stunned by the unexpected attack. "What was that?" Dr. Kem breathed, his compound eyes wide with amazement. Before anyone could answer, more streaks of light appeared in the storm-darkened sky. These were smaller, moving in coordinated patterns that suggested piloted craft rather than natural phenomena. As they descended, Zara could make out their shapes: angular, aggressive-looking vessels that seemed to be constructed from metal alloys rather than the bioorganic materials favored by most galactic civilizations. The Titan recovered from the initial shock and turned its attention skyward, tracking the approaching vessels with its multitude of eyes. Several of the smaller predators that had been circling the crashed ship joined it, their own attention drawn to this new threat from above. One of the unknown vessels swooped low over the Titan's head, and Zara saw something drop from its belly, a small, dark object that exploded on impact with devastating effect. The blast tore through the creature's crystalline armor as if it were paper, sending fragments of the alien Titan flying in all directions. "Those aren't any ships in our databases," Captain Fex said, his voice filled with wonder and confusion. "The technology, the tactics, this is completely unknown." The aerial battle intensified as more of the mysterious craft engaged the planet's predators. Their weapons seemed crude compared to standard galactic military technology, projectile-based rather than energy weapons, chemical explosives instead of plasma charges, but their effectiveness against the native lifeforms was undeniable. Zara watched in fascination as the unknown pilots demonstrated flight patterns that defied conventional tactical doctrine. They flew closer to their targets than any sane pilot would attempt, using their ship's velocity and mass as weapons when their ammunition ran low. One craft actually rammed a flying creature twice its size, both pilot and beast crashing to the ground in a ball of flame and fury. "They're sacrificing themselves," Nero whispered in disbelief. "Those pilots are actually choosing to die rather than retreat." The Titan, wounded but far from defeated, lashed out with its appendages, catching one of the attacking craft and crushing it like an insect. But even as their comrade fell, the remaining pilots pressed their attack with renewed fury. Their formation tightened, their strikes became more precise, and their strange, primitive weapons found every weak point in the creature's armor. Another explosion, larger than the others, sent the Titan crashing to its knees. The impact crater where it fell was visible even from the research ship's damaged viewport. Steam rose from the creature's wounds as its alien biology struggled to cope with the extensive damage. The smaller predators, seeing their Titan ally defeated, began to retreat into the storm. The unknown aircraft pursued them relentlessly, their engines screaming through the atmosphere as they hunted down every visible threat. Within minutes, the area around the crashed astral wind was clear of hostile life forms. The mysterious craft circled overhead, their engines gradually winding down as they prepared to land. "Captain," Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do? We don't know who they are or what they want." Fex was quiet for a long moment, weighing their options. They were stranded, wounded, and running out of time. Their ship was dying around them, and, without outside help, they would all be dead within hours. The choice was simple, even if the consequences were unknown. "We trust them," he said finally. "Open the external communications array. Let's see if our rescuers want to talk." As Zara activated the communication systems, she wondered what kind of beings possessed both the courage and the apparent insanity to attack creatures like the Titan with such primitive technology. The answer, she suspected, would challenge everything they thought they knew about the galaxy beyond their borders. The first of the unknown craft touched down 50 meters from their ship, its landing thrusters kicking up clouds of dust and debris. Through the swirling haze, Zara could see a figure emerging from the cockpit, bipedal, roughly the same size as a Voltani, but moving with a grace and purpose that spoke of deadly competence. Whatever species had just saved their lives, they were about to meet them face to face. The airlock hissed as Captain Fex manually override the safety protocols. With main power fluctuating, automated systems were unreliable at best. The external atmosphere readings showed breathable air, though with a higher oxygen content than standard for most galactic species. Whatever was about to step through that door had just saved their lives, but Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to encounter something unprecedented. The figure that entered the damaged cargo bay stood roughly 2 meters tall, covered head to toe in what appeared to be a form-fitting environmental suit. The material wasn't the biotech polymer commonly used throughout the galaxy, nor the crystalline weaves favored by the more advanced civilizations. This looked almost primitive, woven fabric reinforced with metal plates and synthetic materials that seemed designed for durability rather than sophistication. Most striking was the helmet. Instead of the transparent biomembranes or energy fields that allowed other species to interact naturally with their environment, this being wore a solid metal and ceramic construction with a dark visor that completely concealed their features. It spoke of a species that valued protection over comfort, function over elegance. The figure moved with fluid precision, checking corners and angles as they entered, weapon raised but not immediately threatening. The weapon itself was another puzzle, clearly projectile-based, with mechanical components that clicked and shifted as the stranger swept the room. No energy readings, no plasma conduits, just metal and chemistry and what appeared to be genuine gunpowder. Captain Thex stepped forward, his good arm raised in the universal gesture of peaceful greeting. "I am Captain Thex of the research vessel Astral Wind. We are grateful for your assistance against the indigenous predators." The figure stopped, tilting their head slightly as if processing the captain's words. When they spoke, their voice was filtered through the helmet's communication system, but the underlying tones were unlike anything in Zara's extensive xenolinguistic database. "Captain," the voice said, the words heavily accented but clearly understandable through the universal translator. "I am Lieutenant Marcus Chen, Earth Defense Force. Are there any immediate casualties requiring medical attention?" Zara's ears perked up. Earth. The name wasn't in any galactic registry she'd accessed, but the fact that this human, could communicate through their universal translator meant they possessed at least basic technological parity with galactic civilization. Dr. Kem stepped forward, his compound eyes reflecting his scientific curiosity despite their dire circumstances. Two crew members with serious injuries, one with possible internal bleeding, several with minor lacerations and contusions. "Our medical bay is partially functional." Marcus nodded, a gesture that seemed natural despite the concealing helmet. "My medic is en route. We'll get your people stabilized while my tech team assesses your ship's condition." He paused, seeming to study each of them in turn. "You're a long way from any registered shipping lanes. What brings a science vessel to Kepler 438b? "Research expedition," Captain Thex replied. "We're part of the Nexari Scientific Collective, studying unique planetary ecosystems. We had no idea this world was inhabited by such aggressive life forms." "Or by your people," Zara added, unable to contain her curiosity. "I'm communications specialist Zara. Our databases don't contain any reference to Earth or humans. How long has your species been active in this sector?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Zara could sense him weighing how much to reveal. "Longer than you might think, shorter than we'd like. We've been monitoring this particular system for several months. Kepler 438b is what we call a red zone world planetary ecosystem classified as extremely hostile to sentient life." Another figure appeared in the airlock, carrying what was obviously a medical kit despite its unfamiliar design. This human was smaller than Marcus, moving with the confident efficiency of someone accustomed to treating injuries under combat conditions. They wore similar protective gear, but their helmet was modified with additional sensor arrays and communication equipment. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the newcomer, introduced herself, already moving toward the injured crew members. "Where are your wounded?" As Dr. Mitchell began tending to their injuries with equipment that seemed remarkably effective despite its apparent simplicity, Marcus continued his assessment of the situation. He moved through the damaged cargo bay like someone accustomed to disaster zones, checking structural integrity and cataloging damage with an experienced eye. "Your ship took quite a beating," he observed, running a gloved hand along a massive claw mark in the hull. "Those crystal backs did this?" "Crystal backs?" Dr. Kem looked up from where he was assisting the human medic. "Local designation for the six-limbed predators with the chitinous spines. We've been studying the local fauna for several weeks now. This world has 17 distinct apex predator species, 12 different swarm-type collective organisms, and at least 33 varieties of ambush hunters. It's like someone designed an ecosystem specifically to kill anything foolish enough to land here." Zara felt her blood chill. "Designed?" Marcus paused in his examination of the hull breach, and, even through his helmet's visor, she could sense his attention sharpening. "That's the working theory. The evolutionary patterns here don't follow natural selection models. Too many specializations that only make sense if they were created to counter specific types of technology and behavior patterns. By whom? Captain Thex asked, though Zara suspected they all dreaded the answer. Unknown. We call them the architects. Whatever they were, they've been gone for a long time, but their creations remain. Every world in this sector shows similar characteristics, perfectly adapted predator ecosystems that seem designed to eliminate any species attempting colonization or extended surface presence. Dr. Mitchell looked up from bandaging Engineering Officer Vex's arm. We've counted 47 worlds with similar patterns across this entire spiral arm. All previously inhabited, all now dominated by artificial predator ecosystems. It's like someone salted the galaxy against expansion. The implications hit Zara like a physical blow. If what the humans were saying was true, then vast regions of space were essentially quarantine zones, death traps waiting for unwary explorers. But, more importantly, how had humanity discovered this when the rest of the galactic community remained ignorant? As if reading her thoughts, Marcus straightened and fixed his attention on her. Your people, the galactic civilizations, they don't know about this, do they? You came here thinking this was just another world to study. The Nexari Collective has explored hundreds of worlds, Captain Thex said defensively. Our survey protocols are thorough and comprehensive. But, limited to normal environmental hazards, Dr. Mitchell said gently as she finished treating Vex's injuries. Your people look for radiation, toxic atmospheres, geological instability. You wouldn't think to scan for artificially evolved predator ecosystems because the concept is outside your frame of reference. Marcus activated a communication device on his wrist. The technology looked purely mechanical, no bioorganic components or energy field manipulators that characterized most galactic tech. Chen to base camp. We have 7 survivors from the crashed research vessel. Going to need extraction for 9 total, plus equipment retrieval. The ship's a total loss. A voice crackled back through obvious radio waves, another primitive but effective technology. Copy, Lieutenant. Storm's clearing from the east. We'll have transport birds airborne in 20 minutes. Any hostile contact? Negative. The Titan's down, and the crystalbacks have pulled back to the thermal vents. Area's secure for now. As Marcus coordinated the evacuation, Zara found herself studying the 2 humans with fascination. Their technology was indeed primitive by galactic standards, but it was also remarkably robust and practical. Where galactic civilization favored elegant biotech solutions that integrated seamlessly with the user's biology, humans seemed to prefer mechanical systems that could be maintained, repaired, and modified in the field. Their tactics were equally unconventional. No galactic military doctrine would advocate the kind of close-range, high-risk engagements she'd witnessed during the fight with the planetary predators. The accepted approach would be to maintain distance, use superior technology to neutralize threats efficiently, minimize casualties through superior firepower and defensive systems. But, watching these humans work, Zara began to understand that their approach served a different purpose. They weren't just trying to win efficiently, they were trying to learn. Every engagement was a chance to gather data, to understand their enemy's capabilities and limitations. Their willingness to take risks that other species would consider suicidal allowed them to gather intelligence that couldn't be obtained through long-range observation. Dr. Kem approached Marcus, his scientific curiosity overriding their precarious situation. Lieutenant, if I may ask, how did your people develop such effective countermeasures against these predators? Your weapons, your tactics, they're perfectly adapted to this type of threat. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and, when he spoke, there was something dark in his voice. Because we've seen this before, Doctor. Earth, our homeworld, went through something similar about 200 years ago. We learned the hard way that conventional warfare doesn't work against artificial predator ecosystems. Your homeworld was attacked? Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Not attacked. Transformed. Something, changed our entire planetary ecosystem virtually overnight. Every predator species on Earth suddenly became bigger, faster, smarter, more aggressive. Our cities fell within weeks. Our military was overwhelmed by creatures that seemed to adapt to our weapons as fast as we could develop them. Dr. Mitchell looked up from packing her medical supplies. Humanity survived by abandoning every assumption we had about warfare, about technology, about our place in the universe. We learned to fight dirty, to take risks no sane species would take, to accept casualties that would break most civilizations. But, you survived, Captain Thex said. Barely. And it took us 150 years to reclaim our homeworld. By then, we'd become something different. Harder. More adaptable. Marcus gestured toward the viewport where the remains of the Titan were still visible. When we finally reached the stars and found other worlds with similar ecosystems, we recognized the pattern immediately. Zara felt pieces of a vast puzzle clicking into place. That's why you're here. You're not exploring, you're hunting. You're looking for whoever did this to your world. Among other things. Marcus activated his communication device again. Chen to Dr. Reeves. We're going to have guests. 7 Nexary science personnel, including a xenolinguist and a xenobiologist. Might want to prep the cultural integration protocols. A different voice responded this time, older and carrying the authority of command. Understood, Lieutenant. Bring them in. It's time we had a conversation with the galactic community about what's really happening out here. The sound of approaching aircraft filled the cargo bay as the human extraction team arrived. Through the damaged viewport, Zara could see 3 craft descending through the storm clouds. They looked nothing like the sleek, bio-integrated vessels used throughout galactic civilization. These were purely mechanical constructs, all angles and armor plating and visible weapon systems. As the aircraft landed, Zara realized that everything she thought she understood about the galaxy was about to change. Humanity wasn't just another species struggling to survive in an indifferent universe. They were veterans of a war that the rest of galactic civilization didn't even know was being fought. Marcus turned to address the survivors of the astral wind. I need to warn you, what you're about to see and learn will challenge everything your people believe about galactic exploration and expansion. You're going to discover that there are threats out here that make the predators of Kepler 438b look like domestic pets. He paused at the airlock, his helmeted head turned back toward them. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge when you return to your people? Zara exchanged glances with Captain Thex and the rest of her crew. They'd come to Kepler 438b as scientists and explorers. They were leaving as something else entirely, witnesses to a hidden war that would determine the future of every sentient species in the galaxy. As they prepared to board the human aircraft, Zara couldn't help but wonder, were they being rescued or recruited? The human aircraft's interior was a study in utilitarian design. Where galactic vessels prioritized comfort and aesthetic harmony between organic and technological elements, this craft was purely functional. Exposed conduits ran along the walls, manual controls dominated the cockpit, and every surface showed signs of constant maintenance and modification. Yet despite its apparent crudeness, Zara could sense the robust engineering beneath the surface, systems designed to function under extreme conditions without requiring specialized replacement components. Dr. Mitchell had insisted on continuing to monitor their injured crew members during the flight, her portable medical equipment interfacing surprisingly well with their own diagnostic tools. Zara watched in fascination as the human physician worked, noting how her techniques differed from standard galactic medical practice. Where Nexary medicine focused on biocompatibility and minimal intervention, Dr. Mitchell's approach was aggressively proactive, using chemical compounds and mechanical devices to force the body's healing processes into overdrive. Your medical technology, Dr. Kem observed as he assisted with monitoring Engineering Officer Vek's vital signs. It's remarkably effective despite being, forgive me, but quite primitive by our standards. Dr. Mitchell smiled beneath her helmet's visor. We learned early that sophisticated technology can be compromised, corrupted, or turned against you. When you're fighting enemies that can adapt your own biotech to their purposes, sometimes simple chemistry and mechanical systems are your only reliable options. Through the aircraft's viewports, Zara could see the landscape of Kepler 438b passing beneath them. What she'd initially taken for random geological formations were actually the remains of structures, cities, perhaps, or industrial complexes. The predator ecosystems hadn't just evolved here, they'd conquered an existing civilization. The human base camp emerged from the storm clouds like something from another era. Instead of the flowing, bio-integrated architecture favored by galactic civilization, this was a fortress, angular buildings constructed from metal and ceramic composites, defensive walls bristling with weapon emplacements, and everywhere the harsh lines of military engineering designed for function over form. As their aircraft descended toward the landing pad, Zara could see other human personnel moving with the disciplined efficiency of a military unit. Their equipment was uniformly practical, their formations spoke of combat veterans, and their entire operation radiated the kind of professional competence that came from years of fighting a war that couldn't be won through superior technology alone. Lieutenant Marcus Chen's voice came through the aircraft's communication system. "Dr. Reeves is waiting for you in the command center. Fair warning, he's not big on diplomatic niceties. Dr. Reeves has been fighting this war longer than anyone else alive, and it shows." The aircraft touched down with a mechanical thud that would have been unthinkable in galactic transportation design. As they disembarked, Zara noticed that the entire base was constructed with the same pragmatic philosophy as their vehicles. Everything was reparable, replaceable, and designed to function without requiring exotic materials or advanced manufacturing capabilities. Dr. James Reeves was waiting for them at the base's main entrance, and Zara understood immediately what Marcus had meant about the war showing. The human commander looked to be in his 60s by standard galactic aging metrics, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen far more than any being should have to endure. Scars marked his face and hands, and his left leg had been replaced with a mechanical prosthetic that clicked softly with each step. "Welcome to Forward Operating Base Cerberus," Dr. Reeves said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "I apologize for the circumstances of our meeting, but I'm afraid time is not a luxury we can afford." He led them through the base's main corridor, past busy personnel manning communication stations, maintaining weapons, and analyzing data feeds from orbital sensors. The entire operation had the feel of an intelligence-gathering mission rather than a simple research expedition. "Dr. Reeves," Captain Thex said as they walked. "Lieutenant Chen mentioned that your people have been monitoring this sector for months. Are you operating under authority from your government?" The human commander was quiet for a moment. "Earth's government ceased to exist in any meaningful sense about 100 years ago. What's left of humanity operates under martial law, organized into autonomous military districts that coordinate through necessity rather than political structure. We're here because this is where the enemy is active." They entered a large command center dominated by tactical displays showing stellar cartography data that extended far beyond anything in Nexary databases. Zara could see dozens of star systems marked with various threat assessments, tracking patterns, and what appeared to be attack predictions. The scope of the operation was staggering. Humanity wasn't just monitoring one sector, they were tracking hostile activity across a significant portion of the galaxy. "The entity we call the Architects," Dr. Reeves continued, activating a holographic display that showed the galactic arm in three-dimensional detail. "We've been tracking their expansion patterns for 80 years. They don't attack randomly, they target specific types of worlds, specific developmental levels, specific strategic positions." The display highlighted hundreds of star systems, all marked with the same red designation that had been applied to Kepler 438b. Zara felt her blood run cold as she realized the implications. If the pattern was accurate, then vast regions of what the galactic community considered unexplored space were actually hostile territory. Dr. Kem stepped closer to the display, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic data. "This suggests a level of strategic planning that spans millennia. The intelligence required to coordinate such an operation across multiple star systems, it's beyond anything we've encountered. Beyond anything most species could comprehend," Dr. Reeves agreed. "The Architects don't think in terms of individual worlds or even star systems. They're playing a game where the entire galaxy is the board, and every sentient species is either a piece to be moved or an obstacle to be eliminated." Marcus activated another section of the display, showing detailed biological analyses of the creatures they'd encountered on Kepler 438b. "The predator ecosystems aren't just weapons, they're intelligence-gathering tools. Every creature that dies fighting them provides data about their target species' capabilities, tactics, biology, and psychology. The architects learn from every encounter, adapting their creations to be more effective against specific types of opposition. That's why conventional galactic exploration protocols fail so catastrophically, Dr. Mitchell added. Your people send scientific expeditions to study what you think are natural ecosystems. Instead, you're feeding information directly to an enemy intelligence network that's been preparing countermeasures against your technology and tactics for thousands of years. Zara found her voice despite the growing horror of their situation. How many expeditions? How many ships have been lost to these architect worlds? Dr. Reeves pulled up another display, this one showing missing vessel reports from across the galactic community over the past 50 years. The numbers were staggering: hundreds of ships, thousands of personnel, all officially classified as lost to navigation errors, equipment failures, or routine hazards of deep space exploration. Your people's databases don't connect the dots because they don't have the full picture, he explained. Each missing ship is reported as an isolated incident. But, when you map the disappearances against the architect expansion patterns, the correlation becomes obvious. Captain Thex studied the data with growing alarm. You're saying that the galactic community has been under attack for decades without realizing it. Worse than that, Dr. Reeves said grimly. The attack is accelerating. The architects are moving into the final phase of their expansion. Within the next 10 years, they'll begin targeting the core systems of every major galactic civilization. The weight of that statement settled over the command center like a physical presence. Zara tried to process the implications: billions of beings across hundreds of worlds, all unaware that they were about to face an enemy that had been preparing to destroy them for centuries. Why haven't you warned them? Dr. Kem asked. Surely the galactic community deserves to know about this threat. Dr. Mitchell exchanged glances with Dr. Reeves before answering. We tried, early on. First contact protocols, diplomatic channels, formal warnings through official channels. Your governments classified our reports as unsubstantiated, our technology as primitive, our tactics as unnecessarily aggressive. The galactic community has grown comfortable with its technological superiority, Marcus added. The idea that someone could pose a genuine threat using what appears to be inferior technology is outside their conceptual framework. They can't imagine an enemy that doesn't play by their rules. Dr. Reeves activated another display, this one showing detailed schematics of human military technology. Humanity's entire technological development has been shaped by our war with the architects. We learned that sophisticated technology becomes a liability when your enemy can subvert, adapt, or copy it. So we built systems that are too simple to be compromised, too robust to be easily countered, and too unpredictable to be effectively modeled. Zara studied the schematics with growing understanding. Human weapons weren't primitive, they were specifically designed to be immune to the kinds of countermeasures that had proved so effective against conventional galactic military technology. Their tactics weren't reckless, they were calculated responses to enemies that could adapt to any predictable strategy. The Nexari Collective needs to be warned, Captain Thex said. Our leadership may be skeptical, but the evidence you've shown us is undeniable. Is it? Dr. Reeves challenged. You're 7 survivors of a scientific expedition that suffered what will officially be classified as an equipment failure resulting in a crash landing on a hostile world. Your rescue by an unknown human military unit will be documented as a fortunate encounter with a previously uncontacted species engaged in routine exploration. The implications hit Zara like a physical blow. They won't believe us. Even with all this evidence, the official explanation will be more acceptable to our governments than the truth. Exactly. And, even if they did believe you, what could they do? The galactic community's entire military doctrine is based on technological supremacy and defensive superiority. They're not prepared for an enemy that turns those advantages into vulnerabilities. Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, her expression serious beneath her helmet's visor. But that doesn't mean the situation is hopeless. Humanity has learned to fight this enemy effectively, and we can teach others to do the same. The question is whether your people are willing to abandon everything they think they know about warfare and survival. Marcus pulled up a final display, this one showing projected battle scenarios between architect forces and conventional galactic military units. The outcomes were uniformly catastrophic for the galactic forces. Traditional galactic tactics assume enemies that respond predictably to superior firepower. The architects create enemies that become stronger when faced with conventional military responses. So what's the alternative? Zara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Dr. Reeves smiled, and, for the first time since they'd met him, there was something approaching optimism in his expression. You learn to fight like humans. You abandon assumptions about technological superiority. You accept casualties as a necessary cost of gathering intelligence. You build weapons and tactics that can't be easily countered because they're too simple to subvert. Most importantly, Dr. Mitchell added, you stop trying to fight a civilized war against an enemy that's specifically designed to exploit civilized behavior. The command center fell quiet as the implications settled over them. Everything Zara had believed about galactic civilization's strength and security was crumbling, replaced by the harsh reality of an enemy that had been studying and preparing to destroy them for longer than most of their species had possessed interstellar travel. But, along with the fear came something else, hope. Humanity had faced this enemy and survived. They'd learned to fight effectively against impossible odds. If they could do it, perhaps other species could learn as well. What do you need from us? Captain Fex asked finally. Dr. Reeves straightened, his expression becoming all business. Information. Intelligence about galactic military capabilities, technological specifications, strategic assessments, cultural analysis, everything that will help us understand how the architects will attack your people and how we can help them survive. In return, Marcus added, we'll teach you everything we've learned about fighting this enemy. Tactics, technologies, survival strategies, all of it. Because when the architects make their move against the galactic core, humanity is going to need allies who understand what they're really fighting. Zara looked at her crewmates, seeing the same mixture of fear and determination reflected in their expressions. They'd come to Kepler 438b as scientists seeking knowledge. They were leaving as something entirely different, the first representatives of an alliance that would determine whether galactic civilization survived the coming war. The only question remaining was whether they could convince their people to listen before it was too late. 3 months after their rescue from Kepler 438b, Zara stood in the main conference hall of Nexari Prime, facing a panel of the most powerful beings in galactic civilization. The governing council represented 12 major species and 47 member worlds, their combined authority encompassing nearly 80% of known galactic space. Getting them to listen had taken every favor Captain Fex could call in, every connection Dr. Kem possessed in the scientific community, and a significant amount of political maneuvering by sympathetic elements within the Nexari military. The response had been exactly what Dr. Reeves had predicted. Council Chairwoman Vela, an elderly Nexari with silver fur and cybernetic implants that sparkled along her skull, reviewed the datapad containing their formal report. Her expression remained carefully neutral, but Zara could read the skepticism in her body language. Communications specialist Zara, the evidence you and your crewmates have presented is certainly dramatic. However, the claims made by these humans require extraordinary substantiation. With respect, Chairwoman, Zara replied, keeping her voice steady despite her frustration. The evidence speaks for itself. The correlation between missing expeditions and architect expansion patterns, the technological analysis of their predator ecosystems, the strategic intelligence gathered by human forces over 8 decades of conflict, evidence gathered by a species that claims to represent a civilization that doesn't appear in any galactic registry, interrupted Council Member Krex, a Voltani whose blue scales had darkened with age and authority. Humans arrive claiming to be refugees from a war against an enemy that no other species has encountered, using primitive technology to fight threats that our most advanced scanners fail to detect. Dr. Kem leaned forward in his witness chair, his compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lighting. Council Member Krex, I've examined their technology personally. It's not primitive, it's specifically designed to counter the adaptive capabilities of architect bioweapons. Their tactical doctrine represents a complete paradigm shift away from conventional military thinking. A paradigm shift based on claims that cannot be independently verified, Chairwoman Vela responded. The human representatives refuse to provide detailed specifications of their weapons technology or strategic intelligence beyond what they've already shared. They speak of threats spanning the galaxy while remaining vague about specific enemy capabilities or intentions. Captain Thex, his arm still in a regenerative cast from their crash, spoke carefully. Chairwoman, I understand the Council's skepticism. But, I was there when the Architect's creatures nearly destroyed my ship and crew. I witnessed human tactical capabilities that our military doctrine simply cannot account for. These beings saved our lives using methods that would be considered reckless suicide by any galactic military standard. Which brings us to the crux of the matter, said Council Member Urix, whose insectoid features remained impassive as she spoke. The humans claim that conventional galactic military doctrine is ineffective against these architects. They advocate for adoption of their combat methods, which by their own admission involve accepting casualty rates that our civilizations would consider catastrophic. Zara felt the frustration building in her chest. Every point they raised was being dismissed as unverifiable, every piece of evidence explained away as the product of human manipulation or misunderstanding. The Council was doing exactly what Dr. Reeves had warned them their governments would do, choosing comfortable denial over uncomfortable truth. Counselors, she said, rising from her chair despite protocol. I've spent the last 3 months working with human intelligence analysts, reviewing their data, learning their tactical systems. The threat they describe isn't theoretical, it's immediate. According to their projections, the architects will begin targeting core galactic systems within the next 5 years. Projections based on data gathered exclusively by human sources, Council Member Krex pointed out. Convenient predictions that require immediate action based on information that cannot be independently verified. Dr. Kem's antenna twitched with agitation. The biological analysis of architect creatures is independently verifiable. I've examined tissue samples, genetic structures, behavioral patterns. These organisms show clear signs of artificial enhancement specifically designed to counter known galactic technologies. Enhancement that could be explained by natural adaptation to local environmental conditions, Chairwoman Vela replied smoothly. Dangerous predators are not unprecedented in galactic exploration. That these particular predators proved effective against your expedition's defenses does not indicate galaxy-spanning conspiracy. The chamber fell silent as the weight of that statement settled over them. Zara could see in the counselors' faces that the decision had already been made. The human warnings would be filed as interesting but unsubstantiated intelligence. The missing expeditions would continue to be classified as routine exploration hazards. The galactic community would continue its expansion into architect territory, blind to the trap being prepared for them. However, Chairwoman Vela continued, the Council recognizes the value of establishing diplomatic contact with this human civilization. Their apparent military capabilities and unique technological approaches could prove beneficial to galactic security. We propose formal first contact protocols, cultural exchange programs, and limited technology sharing agreements. Zara felt her heart sink. They wanted to study humanity, to catalog their capabilities and integrate useful elements into galactic civilization. They had no understanding that humanity wasn't seeking to join galactic civilization, they were trying to save it from an enemy it refused to acknowledge. Counselors, Captain Thex said carefully, the humans made it clear that they're not interested in conventional diplomatic relationships. Their priority is preparing for a war that they believe is inevitable. A war that may exist primarily in their own cultural imagination, Council Member Urix observed. Species that have endured traumatic conflicts often develop persistent threat assessment disorders, perceiving enemies where none exist. Professional psychological evaluation of human leadership might be beneficial. The casual dismissal of humanity's warnings as a form of collective mental illness was the final straw for Zara. She stood again, ignoring the disapproving looks from the council members. Permission to speak freely, Chairwoman? Granted, though protocol suggests that we should listen carefully to warnings from beings who survived 8 decades of warfare against an enemy we can't even detect, Zara interrupted. Protocol suggests that when a species demonstrates tactical capabilities that exceed our understanding, we should take their strategic assessments seriously rather than dismissing them as primitive paranoids. The chamber buzzed with whispered conversations as council members reacted to her unprecedented breach of diplomatic etiquette. Chairwoman Vela's expression hardened, her cybernetic implants flickering with disapproval. Communications specialist Zara, your emotional attachment to your rescuers is understandable, but it appears to be compromising your professional judgment. My professional judgment tells me that we're making the same mistake that every extinct civilization in history has made, Zara shot back. We're so convinced of our own superiority that we can't recognize a genuine existential threat when it's presented to us by the only beings who have successfully fought it. The chamber erupted in voices as council members demanded order, her crewmates tried to calm her down, and protocol officers moved to escort her from the proceedings. Through the chaos, Zara saw something that chilled her to the bone. The counselors weren't angry at her outburst. They were embarrassed for her, treating her words as the desperate fantasies of someone who couldn't accept that she'd been deceived by clever aliens. Order! Chairwoman Vela's voice cut through the noise. Specialist Zara, you will confine your remarks to verified facts and professional assessments. The facts are that humanity has survived 80 years of warfare against an enemy that destroys civilizations, Zara replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The professional assessment is that our military doctrine, our technology, our entire approach to galactic expansion makes us perfect targets for architect manipulation. Enough! The chairwoman's tone carried absolute finality. This council will not base policy decisions on unsubstantiated claims about galactic-scale threats. The human warnings are noted and will be included in our threat assessment databases. Formal diplomatic contact will proceed according to established protocols. As security officers moved to escort them from the chamber, Dr. Kem leaned close to Zara. We tried. Perhaps when their own expeditions start encountering architect worlds, they'll be more receptive to human warnings. By then, it will be too late, Zara whispered back. The architects will have mapped our technology, our tactics, our psychology. When they strike, we'll be fighting an enemy that knows us better than we know ourselves. 2 days later, Zara sat in the communications center of the Nexari Military Intelligence Facility, establishing encrypted contact with Forward Operating Base Cerberus. The Council had authorized continued communication with human forces for intelligence sharing purposes, though they'd made it clear that such contact should focus on conventional military cooperation rather than unsubstantiated threat assessments. Dr. Reeves appeared on the holographic display, his scarred features showing no surprise at the news of the Council's decision. I take it they weren't receptive to our warnings. They think you're either lying or delusional, Zara reported. The official position is that humanity represents an interesting military culture worthy of study, but that your warnings about the architects are the product of collective trauma from your homeworld's ecological disaster. Ecological disaster, Dr. Reeves repeated with bitter amusement. That's certainly one way to describe it. Marcus appeared at the edge of the display, his expression grim. Dr. Reeves, we've got new intelligence from the monitoring stations in Sector 7. The architects are accelerating their timetable. Multiple systems showing early-stage predator ecosystem deployment. How early? 6 months ahead of projections. They're not waiting for final phase preparation. They're moving to active assault posture. Zara felt the blood drain from her face. What does that mean? Dr. Reeves turned back to face her, his expression carrying the weight of absolute certainty. It means we're out of time. The architects are beginning their attack on core galactic systems. Your people will start losing entire worlds within the next 18 months. But the Council will continue denying the threat exists until architect predators are rampaging through the streets of Nexari Prime, Dr. Reeves finished. We've seen it before, Zara. Species facing architect assault follow a predictable pattern: denial, then panic, then desperate attempts to negotiate with an enemy that doesn't take prisoners. Marcus stepped closer to the display. There is another option. Individual military units that accept human tactical doctrine and technology integration. Small-scale cooperation that doesn't require governmental approval. It won't save galactic civilization as a whole, but it might preserve enough military capability to mount effective resistance when the attacks begin.
You're talking about military units going rogue, Zara said, understanding the implications immediately. We're talking about military units choosing survival over bureaucracy, Dr. Reeves corrected.
When the architects attack, the chain of command breaks down rapidly. Units that have prepared for autonomous operation tend to last longer than those waiting for orders from command structures that no longer exist. The communication display flickered as additional figures joined the conversation. Zara recognized several of them as the human officers she'd met during their time at Forward Operating Base Cerberus, but others were unfamiliar representatives of species she didn't recognize, wearing equipment that blended human tactical doctrine with alien technological capabilities.
Dr. Reeves, she said slowly, how many species are already working with you? 17 confirmed, with contacts in 12 others.
Most are survivors from architect attacks that their governments refuse to acknowledge. A few are military units that investigated human warnings independently and reached their own conclusions about the threat level. We call ourselves the Resistance Network, Marcus added. Independent military units, scientific teams, intelligence services, and civilian organizations working to prepare for the architect's final offensive.
We can't save everyone, but we can save some.
Zara looked at Captain Thex and Dr. Kem, seeing the same realization in their eyes.
The galactic community wouldn't listen to warnings about the architects until it was too late.
Their only chance of survival lay with this unofficial network of beings who had chosen to prepare for a war their governments refused to acknowledge. "What do you need from us?" she asked. Dr. Reeves smiled, and, for the first time since she'd known him, it was a smile of genuine hope.
"Help us save the ones we can. Your people, our people, anyone willing to listen to the truth about what's coming."
Because in 18 months, Marcus added grimly, the war for galactic survival begins whether anyone believes in it or not.
14 months later, Zara stood on the bridge of the Nexari Defiance, watching the orbital defense platforms of Helix Prime burn in the void.
What had once been the jewel of the Nexari Collective, a garden world with floating cities and bio-integrated architecture that represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization, was now a charnel house. The architect assault had begun 3 days ago with what the Council had initially dismissed as an unusually aggressive indigenous uprising.
They weren't dismissing it anymore.
Status report, Captain Thex commanded from his position at the tactical station. His Nexari military uniform had been modified with human-designed armor plating and communications gear, part of the Resistance Network's standard equipment package. The modifications looked crude compared to standard galactic technology, but they were still functioning while the sophisticated biotech systems throughout the rest of the fleet were failing one by one. Orbital platforms 7 through 12 are offline, reported Lieutenant Corax, a young Voltani whose scales had faded to pale gray since the fighting began.
Architect bioforms have breached the planetary defense grid in 17 locations.
The creatures are adapting to our weapons faster than we can modify our targeting systems.
Through the bridge viewports, Zara could see the nightmare unfolding on the planet's surface.
The predators weren't just the familiar species they'd encountered on Kepler 438b. The architects had deployed entirely new bioforms specifically designed to counter Nexari military doctrine, creatures that could mimic their technology signatures, predators that turned their own weapons against them, swarm entities that coordinated with the kind of tactical precision that had taken galactic military strategists centuries to develop. Communications intercept from the planet, Dr. Kem announced from his position at the intelligence station. The xenobiologist had proven remarkably adaptable to military intelligence work, his scientific background providing crucial insights into architect biological warfare tactics.
Nexari Defense Force Command is requesting immediate evacuation for governmental leadership. They're abandoning the civilian population.
Zara felt her heart clench.
Helix Prime was home to 43 million beings. The Nexari government was preparing to write off every single one of them to preserve their political leadership.
It was exactly the kind of response that Dr. Reeves had predicted would doom galactic civilization.
Signal from the human task force, she reported from her position at the communications array. Admiral Chen is requesting permission to begin ground operations. Admiral Sarah Chen was Marcus's older sister, a veteran of humanity's homeworld reclamation who now commanded the Resistance Network's rapid response fleet.
Her ships looked like relics compared to galactic military vessels, angular, heavily armored craft bristling with projectile weapons and chemical explosives. But they were still fighting while the sophisticated Nexari fleet struggled to adapt to enemies that turned their own technology against them. "Permission granted," Captain Thex replied without hesitation.
"Tell Admiral Chen that we'll provide orbital fire support for her ground operations."
"Sir," Lieutenant Korax said carefully, "the Nexari Defense Force Command has ordered all ships to maintain minimum safe distance from the planetary surface."
Admiral Chen's tactics violate standard engagement protocols.
"Standard engagement protocols," Zara said, activating the tactical display that showed architect bioforms overwhelming every Nexari position that followed those same protocols, "are getting everyone killed." The display revealed the cruel efficiency of the architect assault. Every position that maintained defensive formations was being systematically overwhelmed by creatures that had been specifically designed to counter those exact tactics. Every unit that relied on superior technology was falling to bioforms that adapted faster than galactic weapons could be recalibrated. Every command structure that waited for orders from higher authority was being destroyed while their leaders debated response strategies. The only forces still fighting effectively were the ones that had adopted human tactical doctrine, small, autonomous units that accepted high casualty rates in exchange for intelligence gathering, used simple weapons that couldn't be easily adapted or subverted, and operated according to principles that the architects hadn't encountered in their millennia of preparation.
"Admiral Chen's forces are beginning their descent," Zara reported.
12 dropships, full battalion strength. They're heading directly for the architect command bioforms. On the tactical display, they could see the human assault unfold according to principles that defied every rule of galactic military science. Instead of maintaining safe distances and using superior firepower to eliminate threats, the human forces were deliberately engaging at close range where their mechanical weapons and chemical explosives proved most effective. Instead of coordinated mass formations, they operated in small groups that could adapt instantly to changing battlefield conditions. Instead of preserving their forces for strategic objectives, they were spending lives like currency to gather intelligence about enemy capabilities. And it was working. "Direct hit on the primary command bioform," Dr. Kem announced, his voice tight with amazement. "The creature's regenerative systems are failing. Whatever Admiral Chen's people are using, it's specifically designed to counter architect adaptive biology." Zara knew what they were using: weapons and tactics developed through 8 decades of warfare against an enemy that had learned to counter everything else. Humanity had paid for that knowledge with the blood of countless soldiers, the destruction of their homeworld, and the sacrifice of entire generations. Now they were spending that hard-won expertise to save civilizations that had refused to listen to their warnings.
Signal from Nexari Defense Command, Lieutenant Korax reported. "They're demanding that Admiral Chen's forces withdraw immediately. They claim the human tactics are unnecessarily escalating the conflict." "Unnecessarily escalating," Captain Thex repeated with bitter irony. "Tell Defense Command that Admiral Chen's forces are the only thing standing between Helix Prime and complete annihilation."
"Sir, they're threatening to designate the human forces as hostile if they don't comply with withdrawal orders."
Zara felt something cold settle in her chest.
Even now, with their world burning around them, the Nexari leadership couldn't accept that their fundamental assumptions about warfare and technology were wrong.
They would rather lose the planet than admit that humanity's crude methods were superior to galactic military doctrine.
"Captain," she said quietly, "I'm receiving a priority transmission from the Resistance Network Command. Dr. Reeves wants to speak with you directly." A holographic display activated, revealing the scarred features of the human commander. Behind him, Zara could see the bustling activity of a military command center coordinating operations across multiple star systems. The scale of the Resistance Network's activities had grown exponentially since the Architect offensive began, but it was still pitifully small compared to the scope of the threat they were fighting.
"Captain Thex, I'm afraid I have bad news."
Long-range sensors are detecting Architect forces moving toward the Nexari core systems.
"The attack on Helix Prime is just the beginning." "How many systems?" Captain Thex asked, though his expression suggested he already dreaded the answer. All of them.
Every major population center, every industrial world, every military installation. The architects are launching simultaneous attacks against targets across 47 systems.
They're not trying to conquer galactic civilization, they're trying to destroy it completely. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't a war in any conventional sense, it was an extermination campaign on a galactic scale.
The architects had spent centuries preparing for this moment, mapping every galactic defense, cataloging every species' capabilities, designing specific bioweapons to counter each civilization's strengths.
What are our chances? Dr. Kem asked.
Dr. Reeves was quiet for a long moment.
If galactic civilization continues trying to fight this war using conventional methods? 0.
The architects have planned for every standard tactical response. They've designed specific countermeasures for every type of galactic military technology.
Fighting them with conventional doctrine is like using their own weapons against them. And if we adopt human tactics? Zara asked. Then, we might save 10% of the current population.
Maybe 15% if we're very lucky and very ruthless about who we choose to save. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Hundreds of billions of beings across dozens of species, reduced to statistical casualties in a war that most of their leaders still refuse to acknowledge. Entire civilizations would vanish, their achievements erased, their cultures destroyed by an enemy that had been preparing to kill them since before they'd achieved spaceflight. There is one alternative, Dr. Reeves continued, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he was about to propose something terrible. The architects are coordinating this assault from a central command structure. If that structure could be destroyed. You're talking about attacking their homeworld, Captain Thex said. We're talking about a suicide mission against the most heavily defended location in the galaxy, Dr. Reeves corrected. The architect homeworld is protected by bioforms that make the creatures you've encountered look like domestic pets. The few scout ships that have survived long enough to gather intelligence report defensive systems that could destroy a standard galactic battle fleet without even fully engaging. But, you have a plan, Zara said, recognizing something in the human commander's expression. We have a theory. The architects' greatest strength is their ability to adapt and counter any threat they encounter.
But, adaptation requires time, analysis, understanding.
If we could mount an attack using tactics and technologies they've never encountered, methods so alien to their experience that their adaptive systems can't respond effectively.
What kind of tactics?
Dr. Kem asked, his scientific curiosity overriding the growing horror of their situation. Dr. Reeves activated another display, showing schematic diagrams that made no sense according to any galactic engineering principles.
Weapons that don't work according to known physics. Propulsion systems that violate basic laws of spacetime. Tactical doctrines based on concepts that no rational species would consider. Impossible technology, Zara breathed.
Technology developed by species that faced extinction and had nothing left to lose, Dr. Reeves corrected.
The Resistance Network has been in contact with survivors from 23 civilizations that have faced architect assaults. Each species developed unique survival methods, desperate innovations that exist outside normal technological paradigms.
Individually, none of them were sufficient to defeat the architects.
But, combined, the display showed a ship unlike anything in known galactic databases.
It incorporated elements from dozens of different technological traditions, human mechanical systems, Nexary biointegration, crystalline matrices from species Zara had never heard of, energy manipulation techniques that seemed to bend the laws of physics. It looked like the fever dream of a mad engineer, a vessel that should have been impossible to construct, let alone operate.
The Defiant Hope, Dr. Reeves announced.
A ship built from the combined knowledge of every species that has survived architect assault. It incorporates every desperate innovation, every impossible technology, every survival technique that 23 different civilizations have developed while facing extinction. And, you want us to take this impossible ship on a suicide mission against the architect homeworld, Captain Thex said. I want you to take this impossible ship and prove that sometimes impossible is exactly what the galaxy needs. Zara looked around the bridge at her crewmates, seeing the same mixture of terror and determination reflected in their faces. They'd come this far based on trust in human tactical doctrine and technology. Now they were being asked to take that trust to its ultimate conclusion, betting the survival of galactic civilization on concepts that defied everything they thought they knew about reality. On the tactical display, Admiral Chen's forces continued their desperate battle on the surface of Helix Prime, buying time for evacuation ships to rescue a few thousand civilians from a population of millions. It was exactly the kind of hopeless, costly sacrifice that human doctrine demanded, spending everything to save whatever could be saved, accepting terrible losses in exchange for any victory, however small.
"When do we leave?" Zara asked.
Dr. Reeves smiled, and this time it was the smile of a being who had found others willing to pay the same price he'd been paying for 8 decades. "The Defiant Hope launches in 6 hours. I hope you're all ready to discover what's possible when you stop believing in limitations." As the communication ended and they prepared to abandon the bridge of the Nexary Defiance, Zara realized that she was no longer the same being who had crash-landed on Kepler 438b 14 months ago. She'd started as a communications specialist seeking knowledge. She was ending as something entirely different, a warrior in a war for the survival of everything she held dear.
The only question remaining was whether impossible would be enough.